The poet calls this event the Day of Yahweh and describes how people will react when it comes. In passing, we would say that the name Shaddai for God is the ancient name for God before God revealed himself as he who is Yahweh. Verses 9 to 16. The poet now describes what the judgment day will look like. The cosmological disorder of darkness at noon, the rattling of the heavens, the shaking of the earth's foundations. The earth's foundations, if we remember, earth sinks into the seas beneath. The invading army will be merciless. Infants smashed on the rocks, wives raped, houses looted. It's the end of the world as we know it. A terrible, terrible event. And finally, verses 17 to 22, the poet now turns to the destruction of Babylon by the Medes. He speaks of Babylon's pride and glory and splendor. And that's exactly what Isaiah does not like. Human pride before the majesty of God. And he sees its depopulation and its transformation from a city into a wilderness. So a great topic, or masterful, powerful one. Then the second section is the implications for Israel of all this. We move into chapter 14 now, verses 1 to 4a. In all this destruction, God will again have compassion on his people Jacob. He will choose them again. They will return to their land and be joined by foreigners, their former captives. So it'll be wonderful. And it anticipates the joyful message of 2nd Isaiah at the time of the return after the exile. The third section in these oracles on Babylon is a taunt song against a tyrant. And we're in chapter 14, verses 3 to 21. This poem is a parody of the conventional dirge when someone dies. We can go back and look at that conventional dirge in 2 Samuel chapter 1, when David mourns the death of his friend Jonathan. Now, the one we're looking at here may originally have been composed at the death of a hated Assyrian king, or for Nebuchadnezzar, who destroyed Jerusalem, or even possibly Nabonidus, the last king of Babylon. So we don't know when it was composed. Could be way back, or could be the time of the Babylonian demise. In the words of Joseph Jensen, it's a magnificent composition, rich in imagination and elusive force, which skillfully utilizes elements of pagan myths. It's saying something with great praise. There's great joy instead of sadness at the tyrant's death. And there's the great pomp that surrounded him in life is replaced by, isn't this wonderful, a bed of maggots to lie on and a blanket of worms to cover you. The allusion to the day star in St. Jerome's Vulgate Latin translation, the day star becomes the word Lucifer. And in the day star's fall, it's pagan, a pagan origin it has, but in Christian thought, this becomes, of course, the devil, the fall of the devil, and the theme of Milton's great poem, Paradise Lost. The hated tyrant receives no honourable burial, but is abandoned. The final verses are a curse upon him and upon his progeny. Quite interesting. And then the fourth and the final part of this oracles on Babylon is the fall of Assyria That's chapter 14, verses 22 to 27. Brevard Childs, his commentary actually is online, his commentary on Isaiah, and you can read it there. He says that this passage is shaped in the form of a summary appraisal, summarizing and confirming God's decision to destroy. And coming directly after the oracles on Babylon, the editor is highlighting, and I quote him, that within the divine purpose, both foreign powers are joined and represent within the stages of human history the selfsame reality of arrogance, which God's kingship is in the process of destroying, and will in the end fully succeed as victorious. It's all following God's plan of destroying the proud. Blenkinsopp puts it this way: the destruction of Babylon represents the final fulfillment of the anti-Assyrian prophecies. So we've got to try to see in the editor's mind, of course, how he's looking at both these events and linking them in his understanding of how God works. Now we're going to look at, in the next section, are the oracles concerning Moab, and that's chapters 15 and 16. The Moabites were pastoral nomads in the Transjordan, across the Jordan highlands, on the eastern side of the Dead Sea. Their capital was Dibon, and the book of Judges speaks of a huge battle between the Israelites and the Moabites. And there were clearly tensions between both nations, both peoples, at the time of the Assyrian ascendancy. But we can also know there are periods when there was great intermixing between them, because the book of Ruth witnesses to this, the beautiful book of Ruth. The single block, which we now have on the Moabites, is generally thought to comprise 3 separate units. We're into chapter 15, verses 1 to 9. That's a lament over Moab. Then chapter 16, verses 1 to 5, a proposal for the Moabites to take refuge in Judah. And then continuing chapter 16, verses 6 to 11, a lament in light of the pride of the Moabites, with then a conclusion. Blenkinsopp writes, from early days, commentators have noted the rough, unpolished style of the 2 oracle poems, their metric irregularity and their lack of proportion. The poems lack originality and are the work of a bricolage put together out of bits of traditional prophetic material. There are fragments from Jeremiah 48. Let's have a little bit of a look at this in detail. The first thing is the lament over Moab. The capital Dibon seems to have suffered a devastating nocturnal attack. Elsewhere it seems as though it was a natural disaster which devastated the more densely populated part of the country. The poet writes, my heart cries out for Moab, and for all the refugees who have to flee from the north to the south. Now we don't know what this terrible event was about. And the next few verses are difficult to interpret. They seem to say there's a Moabite mission to Jerusalem asking for asylum for these fleeing refugees. The next thing to comment on is the lament over Moab, version 2 or part 2, chapter 16 now, verses 6 to 11. Brevard Childs believes this lament is over the fact that the Judeans refused to help the refugees because of the perceived pride of their nation and their arrogance. The lament is mainly about the loss of vineyards